but it doesn't mean you have to be chained to your kitchen and be cooking all the time, because actually a lot of this is patriarchy, because a lot of men in India have wives who stay home and cook and clean for them all the time. So it's really easy for them to demand a fresh, hot meal when they're not the ones doing it. But we have things to do, and I don't want anyone to deprive themselves from living out their dharma because they felt like they needed to cook a meal every 3 hours.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, my friends. Thank you for being here. Welcome back to the show. Today, I have best-selling author and Ayurvedic nutritionist Sahara Rose back with me on the show. Now, she came on the show really early, so I'll link up her old episode below. So if you're not familiar with the basics of Ayurveda, I'm going to suggest hers as a really great episode to listen to, because today we are going to go deeper. She's going to tell us how she really loved the wisdom of the Ayurvedic diet for its intuitive and customizable nature, but how she ultimately longed to make it more alkaline, plant-based, and low glycemic. So Sahara's going to really tell us today about her journey reviving this ancient science of Ayurveda for a modern alkaline kitchen. So those of you that are vegan or vegetarian are going to love this. Now, since the doshas often steal this show, I feel like in any conversation about Ayurveda, I purposely asked Sahara today to kind of go deeper into some other aspects of Ayurveda that aren't as well known, which is why I'm going to recommend listening to her first podcast if you don't know anything about the doshas or Ayurveda at all. Today we're going to go deeper. She's going to educate us about the 6 tastes of Ayurveda, which I find are often confusing, so we're going to demystify terms like pungent and astringent, and she's going to tell us how you can actually cook one Ayurvedic meal that will feed your whole family, even if everyone in your family has a different predominant dosha. This is something I've always wondered about, and she's going to tell us what she actually experienced in India when she was studying Ayurveda around this. Before we dive into today's episode, I just want to remind you of how you can support the show. Number one is you can make a purchase on SavannahSpirit.com. If you're a new customer, use that coupon code TAKE25 for $25 off anything in your shopping cart. And I'm recommending today their beautiful Jaipur wraps. They're just these really colorful, beautiful, long, flowy vests. It's just the kind of thing that I could picture Sahara wearing in her beautiful new book that she'll also tell us about that has really colorful illustrations. They're just happy and gorgeous, and definitely check them out at SavannahSpirit.com. And the second way you can support is by leaving a rating or review here on iTunes. And many of you know I've been doing this for a while now, but if you leave a review and then take a quick screenshot of that review and email it to my team, info@brettlarkin.com, I will send you this really beautiful PDF booklet of my favorite journaling prompts and affirmations, just as a gift from me to you to say thank you for taking the time. And if you're not sure how to leave a review, go to SavannahSpirit.com/review, because we have step-by-step instructions for you there. And if you expand the description of the podcast, we also have all this links and everything written out for you as well if you're confused about how to do any portion of what I just described. Now, Sahara Rose is the best-selling author of The Idiot's Guide to Ayurveda, which is the #1 best-selling Ayurvedic book globally, and her upcoming book, Eat, Feel Fresh, a plant-based Ayurvedic cookbook. And it's so much more than a cookbook. She sent me an early proof, and oh my gosh, you guys, this book is beautiful and has just so much more information than just recipes. She's been called a leading voice for the millennial generation by Deepak Chopra, who wrote the foreword to both her titles, and I'm so thrilled to have her on the show. Let's dive in. Sahara, I'm so excited that you're coming back on the show. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, well, I'm in love with your new book, and I know we're going to tell people about it. I think the first place I want to start is your book is kind of like a reinvention of Ayurveda. I feel like for the modern woman or the modern human, why did Ayurveda need a modernization?
Yeah. So, it all kind of came because when I suffered from really bad health problems, I eventually discovered Ayurveda, and so much of it rang true for me. I saw that we were all bio individuals and how this one size fits all diet isn't working. And it was very clear to me that the Western approach to health was very acute, very based off of the symptom and not seeing the whole problem. So that's what guided me to Ayurveda. But then at first I said Ayurveda is perfect. Everything about Ayurveda is the right way. And like Ayurveda is just the solution to everything. And I signed up for Ayurveda school. I lived in India for 2 years studying Ayurveda. And I realized that no system is perfect. And though, just like yoga, the truths are universal and they never will change, the approach was geared to people who lived in ancient India over 5,000 years ago when Ayurveda was created during the time of the Vedas. The Vedas are the world's oldest written text. So Ayurveda was formulated before we had refrigerators. They lived in ancient northern India. They had very different lifespans than us. They worked as farmers. They obviously didn't have the pollution, the pesticides, the GMOs, the antibiotics, the EMFs, all of these, great things that come with the beautiful modernization of society. So we need to look at it differently. And I kind of dove into a lot of the things that when I was studying Ayurveda just didn't quite make sense to me. And it actually took a level of courage to, at first I thought, who am I to question this age old belief? Like, no one questions these things. Then I realized that Ayurveda is a living and breathing science, and it has always changed throughout generations, throughout history. And I started to dive in deeper. We can talk about the little things that I found that need to be different for today. Really, my big why was because when I tried to do things that old ancient way without questioning it and tailoring it, it didn't help me. When I made the differences, that's what changed my entire life. And I think with everything in life, you have to, take what works for you and question everything that you take into your body.
I love how you share about the courage it took to sort of question Ayurveda. It kind of reminds me about what we talked about when I was a guest on your incredible podcast about kind of just taking action and moving out of your comfort zone, because I'm sure it felt so scary for you to question some of this ancient science. But honestly, so much of what you've sort of changed or enhanced about Ayurveda makes so much sense. And I want to give listeners some practical examples of what we're talking about. So in Ayurveda, traditional Ayurveda, it's very rich in dairy, right? And ghee, which is clarified butter, is basically something that's it's promoted as you're just like eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? But that's because in these ancient times when these texts were written and these traditions were passed down, cows were sacred, right? Sahara, so there was none of the issues we have today with antibiotics and big dairy and hormone imbalances that come with that kind of dairy intake. I'm sure I'm butchering the example, but can you kind of talk about that and some of the other kind of practical shifts that, I think they make so much sense.
Dairy is a big part, the biggest part, I think, because in ancient Ayurveda, as you mentioned, cows were revered because in Hinduism, Lord Shiva was a bull herder. And so the cow, the bull, was just as holy as Shiva himself. So cows are called the mother of India. So a cow's milk, a cow's ghee, the cheese, the yogurt, everything of it was considered sacred. And again, they had their neighborhood cow who they would bless with flowers and ate the same foods they would eat. And there was no plastic. You go to India now, these cows in India themselves are so maltreated. They are, in India, it's illegal to kill cows, again, because of the religion, but they end up just kind of walking around the streets, living off of trash, and then eventually dying. So how can we say that cow's milk is sacred and holy? And in the US and in many countries in Europe and other places, factory farming is a really big issue. And these cows are pumped with hormones to make them have more milk because then they're more profitable per cow. They're in such poor conditions that they would have normally died in and gotten grave diseases. So they're pumped up with antibiotics. And again, everything a cow takes into his body is going to come out into his milk. So we are going to take that. So this wasn't an issue in Ayurvedic times. And they also didn't have access to things like avocados. They didn't eat chia seeds. There are a lot of ingredients that come from other areas in the world. Just because they're not from India doesn't make them unhealthy. I think it would be ignorant of us to say only Indian food is healthy and no other food is, when there are blue zones, areas around the world where people are centurions. They live over 100 years and their diets are very different, from the Okinawa Islands to Costa Rica. The tenets are the same. So I took the guidelines, the principles, the real juice of Ayurveda. And then I said, okay, how can we make this work today's day and time? So the dairy definitely needs to come out. And if you do choose to have dairy, it needs to be raw and organic and in moderation. Not, in ancient times, they didn't have eye drops, for example. So if something got on your eye, they'd put ghee in your eyes. They had constipation. So they would use ghee for, as enemas. They would really use it in every which way. And I think that was very, very wise and far past their time. But now we have other things that we could be using. And I think that if we have better options, why not use them?
I know. I really think your approach is so sophisticated because it's taking ancient science and blending it with modern science. Like, I've interviewed so many incredible guests on Savannah who talk about the importance of fermented food. And I know traditional Ayurveda doesn't allow fermented food, but that's because the heat in India way back when, didn't really allow for safe fermentation. So in your cookbook, in your book, you say, fermented foods actually are beneficial to your gut. We know that now from modern science, and you kind of blend it with the Ayurvedic tradition. It's really, really unique.
Yeah. And also, Ayurveda says don't eat fermented foods. Well, dosas are fermented. Idlis are fermented. Lassi is fermented. Dahi, which is yogurt, is fermented. So they're eating a lot of fermented, but they, I guess, don't realize that these foods are fermented. So it's just this, with anything that is an ancient science, it was passed on orally for so long. And when the British rule took over India, Ayurveda had to go underground. So a lot of the knowledge, it became a kitchen science. So a lot of information from, Ayurveda is practiced so differently in different regions of India. And how can we say that one is true Ayurveda and one isn't? Because it's really an adaptation. In northern India to southern India, I mean, not only are they different cultures with different languages, but they have totally different dietary needs, because one is like a tropical, almost Caribbean-like place. In North India, especially if you go up to the Himalayas, is like cold and the people look different, the culture is different. So even within India, there's such diversity in the way that we eat. And I think that we oftentimes like simplify it, like, oh, all Ayurvedic food is just Indian food, which is just khichdi. And that's not the case. When you dive into something, it's way more complex than it seems on the surface.
No, I know. And that's why your approach is so sophisticated, I think. Talk us through acid, because I'm gonna butcher saying this, but alkalinity or alkalizing, right? That's like a really, I feel like, trending right now. How does that merge with Ayurveda?
Yeah. So foods are either acid forming or alkaline forming. And an acid forming food does not mean it is, for example, just like lemon, lime, and apple cider vinegar. It actually means something that's going to bring your pH level to the more acidic side. And again, we don't want to be 100% alkaline. We want to have a balance. But most foods that we eat, wheat, sugar, dairy, especially with the GMO crops and the fertilizers, the hybridization, the pesticides, they take, before people could eat wheat, they could eat bread. Even in many parts of the world, they still can. But in the US, Canada, etc., that same exact piece of bread is filled with pesticides that you're not seeing, but it's making your body acidic. So we need to make an extra effort to include more alkalizing foods in our bodies, which look like leafy greens, plant-based options, fruits, things that are local and seasonal. About 80% alkaline diet, 20% acidic. And when I say acidic, I don't mean go to the processed foods and sugar, but things that may be more acid forming could be, for example, doing more like nuts and just more hearty foods, but you wouldn't want to make that the majority of your diet. So really it's a fresh approach, and it's seeing that our bodies are in such a, in Ayurveda, they call pollutants garvisha, and there's so much garvisha in our food, in our air, etc. So we need to take an extra initiative to include more cleansing and detoxifying foods in our body, not to go on a strict detox because our bodies are always cleansing, but to give our bodies a hand in this process.
I love it. It makes perfect sense. And for those of you that are listening to this and you're totally new to Ayurveda, definitely listen to the first episode I did with Sahara, because we go over Pitta and Vata and Kapha and Prakriti and Vakriti in that episode. And there's been some other amazing Ayurvedic experts on Savannah as well. Because this is my second go round with Sahara, I wanted to go a little deeper. I was wondering, Sahara, I'm hoping you're game to kind of go into the tastes in Ayurveda, because I think a lot of people are familiar with this concept of the mind-body type, right? So we have Pitta, Vata, Kapha. So we can, do a quick summary of those for people if you think you can do it succinctly, because I'd really love to go more under the hood and talk about the tastes in Ayurveda, because I feel like this is something that's more nuanced and never really gets airtime.
For sure, definitely, because the doshas just take so long, and people don't realize the doshas is like one little piece of Ayurveda.
I know, it's like
so much more.
Tip of the iceberg. Yeah, they steal the show, so let's not let that happen.
Yes. So in Ayurveda, they say that you should always have the 6 tastes. And these 6 tastes will essentially fulfill your body on a cellular level by giving you the nurturing nutrients that you need. So you're not like hungry anymore. A lot of us, we go on these diets, for example, like we're strict paleo or keto, etc., and we totally cut off all carbs. I'm not going to eat any sweet potatoes. I'm not even going to eat any fruit. What ends up happening is you start to daydream about chocolate and cookies and brownies and anything sweet, because your body has been so deprived from the sweet taste. So we need all 6 tastes. Our bodies need them. They have different nutritional qualities. They have different energetic qualities. And then when we eat all 6 tastes, then we no longer have cravings anymore, because cravings are just a signal that your body is nutritionally out of balance.
Amazing. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So let's go through the tastes. They're sweet, sour, salty, bitter, astringent, and pungent. And I think even knowing what the tastes are, it's a little confusing for people to be like, well, what's a practical example of sweet or sour? So maybe we can break that down for folks.
Yes. So I say in my book, have your lunch as a 6-taste bowl. It's similar to a Buddha bowl, but you're incorporating all 6 tastes. And that way you're not like guessing, oh, did I get enough protein, this, that? You're like, okay, did I get all 6 tastes in? I'm good. So your sweet is your base. That could look like either some form of healthy grain. It could be quinoa, barley, or brown rice. Doesn't have to be a grain. You can do this grain-free also. Or it could be a starchy vegetable. So a baked sweet potato, butternut squash, pumpkin. It can be carrot, beet. These are all sweet vegetables that are root vegetables, meaning they grow under the ground. So they're grounding. They're going to be balancing for the Vata dosha, the air body type. And they're going to make sure that you're not craving sugar later on in the day. Like a carrot's sugar is not the same as a bag of M&M's sugar. We can't compare the two. So we need something sweet, and that's a really good sort of carbohydrate. And it doesn't need to make the majority of your meal, but just have a little bit of that in there.
Man, I think that's great to clarify for people too, because sweet doesn't mean a candy bar in Ayurveda. Like the sweet taste, like Sahara is saying, it means grains, it means sweet potato, it means fruit, avocados, things like that. So
yes, even healthy fats, which don't taste sweet, like the avocados, coconut, cashews, almonds, oils, these are all in the sweet taste, because sweet means building, right? It's energy. So it's just a form of like a solid type of like almost like a carbohydrate source that you would need, but it also includes healthy fats. It's something that's, because we can either get nourishment from fats or from carbs, which is why keto diet is only getting it from fats. The high carb, low fat diet is only getting it from carbs. But in Ayurveda, they say, well, we shouldn't demonize either. Just make sure they're in balance with the other tastes.
Which makes so much sense, because then you're avoiding all the crazy cravings that we talked about before.
Totally, yes. And then the good thing is with something like that, you can make it ahead and do like meal prepping, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. One thing that really needs to change in Ayurveda is the belief that food should not be consumed if it's been cooked more than 3 hours ago. And when I dove into this, why is that the case? Well, it's because they didn't have refrigerators back then. So if I cooked something and it was sitting out in 100-degree weather for more than 3 hours, it would have gone bad and I would have gone sick if I had it. The same reason why no raw vegetables are allowed in Ayurveda. Well, if you've ever gone to India, the first thing they tell you is don't eat raw vegetables, because there's little amoebas, single cell parasites in the soil, so you can get sick. So again, you can meal prep. You can cook. I say cook twice a week, have it all in your fridge and just warm it up on the stove or wherever you go. It's honestly better to eat it cold than to microwave it, in my point of view, but it doesn't mean you have to be chained to your kitchen and be cooking all the time, because actually a lot of this is patriarchy because a lot of men in India have wives who stay home and cook and clean for them all the time. So it's really easy for them to demand a fresh, hot meal when they're not the ones doing it. But we have things to do. And I don't want anyone to deprive themselves from living out their dharma because they felt like they needed to like cook a meal every 3 hours.
Well, I want us to keep talking about the taste, but I also want to dive into what you're saying because I think it's important. And I think a resistance people have to Ayurveda is just like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so much work, which is why I was so excited when I saw in your book that you kind of give people ideas of how to meal plan. And I want to talk about one of the other things that I think is really a huge question mark for folks, because anytime I tell someone how excited I am about my Ayurvedic diet, which I'm following, you'd be very proud of me, Sahara, but they say, well, what about your husband? Right? Like, what are you feeding him? And how do you cook a meal that's going to work for your whole family when you're following this? And you address that in the book, and I want you to share it with listeners.
Yeah, so a lot of it is going back to the 6 tastes. So these 6 tastes are tastes that everyone needs regardless of your dosha. So after sweet, we go into sour. Sour foods are just something that help your body detoxify. So it's lemon, lime, apple cider vinegar, really easy and simple. Salty is something that's a natural source of minerals. So that could look like a pink Himalayan sea salt. It could also be something like celery or seaweed, which are rich in trace minerals that our soil is depleted from. Because 80 to 90% of Americans today, and I wouldn't even say Americans, I would say the global population is chronically dehydrated. And it's not because we're not drinking enough water. It's actually because there aren't the same minerals in our water and in our soil as there were even 100 years ago. So we need to actively be remineralizing ourselves by having sea vegetables, because under the sea, they haven't stripped the minerals. So sea vegetables are very high. Celery, that's why celery juice, medical medium, is super popular right now. Or adding some trace mineral supplements into your water every day. It doesn't mean you're like not Ayurvedic. It means that our bodies have very, very different demands for today. And I want you to take the best care of yourself and not feel like you have to follow the certain set of rules that you ignore information that your body is screaming out to you. So after salty, we go into bitter. And bitter foods are, I would say, should make the basis of the diet, at least half of the plate. And these are vegetables. So you can do leafy greens, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, cauliflower. These all fall under the bitter category. And I'll talk more about how you can customize your portion sizes for the doshas, but particularly if you're a kapha dosha, so that means you're trying to lose weight, maybe feeling lethargic, you want to especially amplify the bitter foods because they're very good for weight loss and detoxification. Then we have astringent. So the word astringent means something that sucks in water. It's a taste that we're less familiar with. But
I know, I think this one's super confusing for people, myself included. So I'm excited you're going over it.
I was very confused with astringent as well. And, if you think about something that sucks in water, think about if you've ever made chickpeas or lentils or any kind of beans. You put it in water and an hour later you come back and the water is like evaporated. It's just sucked it right in. So legumes are a really good example of the astringent category. They're something that suck in water. You could also look at cranberries and pomegranates, unripe fruit. These are all foods that almost when you have them, you make a puckering taste in your mouth. It's almost like, oh, this is like kind of not ripe. That is an astringent taste, just like if you ate sprouts or if you ate a bean that wasn't fully cooked yet, it would give you that puckering taste. So that is the astringent category. And again, it's very, very detoxifying. So everyone can use the astringent taste because it gives us that sense of detoxification, especially for kaphas, but it can really benefit for everyone regardless of their dosha constitution. Then next, the last taste is pungent. So pungent is what gives our food flavor. So pungent includes spices such as turmeric, ginger, and cumin, which are very common in Ayurvedic and Mexican and other types of cuisine as well. And it also includes onion and garlic. So for most of the world, when we start to cook, the first thing we do is we throw on onion and garlic on our stove. And, in India, they say you don't even know what you're going to cook yet. You just start frying the onions. From a yogic perspective, onions and garlics are actually not supposed to be consumed. We could talk more about this, but the vibration actually can make you more rajasic, which is more aggressive, or more tamasic, which is dull. So it's interesting, and I have notes about this, and we can talk about this, but the Ayurvedic path is for the householder. It's for the person who wants to just get married and have kids and like live a normal life and be their optimal self. Whereas the yogic path traditionally was for not someone that wants to be a householder, someone that wants to fully dedicate themselves only to the union with Brahma, universal source consciousness. So for that reason, they would not eat anything that's spiced, oniony, garlicky, anything that may affect their subtle vibration, because they need to be at that meditative, sattvic, pure state all the time. Not saying that that needs to be anyone's goal, but it's interesting because you can see how much food affects our subtle vibration.
That's awesome. And on Thursday's episode, I'm going to be going deep with you into the energetics of food. And I'm also going to do a pretty intensive asking about your kitchen tools, because I have questions about that I want listeners to hear after reading your book. But before we close out for today, do you want to just tie this back to how the 6 tastes mean that you don't have to cook a customized meal for every single person in your family's dosha? Because it's like you're saying we all need the 6 tastes, right? No matter what.
Yes. So, I always thought everyone needs to have their own individual meal until I lived with Ayurvedic doctors in India and I saw everyone just ate the same meal. And I realized that they just avoid the foods that will severely aggravate a dosha. So, for example, vatas, who are very airy, constipation, bloated, gassy, they should not have something raw. So don't do a raw green salad as your dinner. If you have a vata in your family, X that out. Now, pittas, they tend to get more hot, acidic, acne. So they shouldn't do lots of spices, hot sauce, anything too filled with garlic, tomato sauce, etc. So cut that out. Don't do Thai food. And for kaphas, they shouldn't do anything that's too damp and cool, like lots of dairy products, bread, sugar. So cut that out. So if you cut out the raw, the spicy, and the heavy dairy stuff, you have a tridoshic meal. So when you eat these 6 tastes, these ingredients that I just mentioned, they work for all of the doshas. And what you can do is, let's say you're a vata, you can boost up the sweet because vatas need more sweet. If you're a kapha, take extra of the bitter and of the astringent and of the pungent. If you are a pitta, take extra of the sweet and of the bitter. So you can customize the bowl just based off of your portions for your dosha. Doesn't mean you have to eliminate anything.
Can you give us an example of a tridoshic meal?
Yeah. So in fact, my book is geared towards all of the dinners being tridoshic, because dinner is a time that you come together with your family, and we don't have time to cook everyone individual meals, and a lot of my meals are just one pot meals. So I'll give an example of what's something that people wouldn't normally imagine. Okay, so let's say they want to do a curry. That's a really easy thing. Well, the pitta should not do too much spicy food because it's going to make them rajasic, irritable. So let's do a green curry instead. You can make a green curry paste yourself using different herbs. You can make it with coconut oil. That's very cooling. Coconut milk. Add in some different vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, zucchini, basil. So it's cooling but still cooked. And just make sure in the green curry paste you're not putting in like jalapeno or some chili peppers in there if you have a pitta in the family. So something like that, really, really easy, can work for anyone. You could do a casserole, and just in the casserole, instead of using dairy cheese, you can use a cashew cheese or a plant-based cheese, and maybe not too much of it, just a little sprinkle of it, or a nutritional yeast or something. So when you cook foods, that works for the vatas and for the kaphas, but you just want to make sure you're not cooking it with excess spices so it imbalances the pittas. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And then the kaphas in the family can add a little, chili sauce or something to whatever, and it can really just work for everyone. I think it makes so much sense.
Totally. And when you eat in an Ayurvedic or an Indian restaurant, there's so many options on the table, and it's because there was a lot of freedom. People customized the meal to what they needed. Let's say an elderly person, she was feeling weak, she wanted, just more rice, etc. So there are so many ways that you can just customize it, but just think, I want to make sure I don't want to imbalance any of the doshas, no raw, no spicy, no dairy. And from there, it's way less complicated than people think.
That's why there's so many spices on the table. It makes so much more sense now. So on Thursday, I'm bringing Sahara back. We're going to talk about the energies in food. We're going to talk a little bit about what her kitchen looks like and essential kitchen tools that you want to have at home if you want to start exploring all of this. And of course, you want to get her book, Feel Fresh. I'm going to post all the information about it in the description of this podcast, so make sure to check it out. And we'll talk to you all on Thursday.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.